Last night was debate night in Oklahoma, or it was in Oklahoma as well, but also in America as presidential candidates Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton debated on national television, hosted by Lester Holt. The day after, we're chatting now via Skype with our man in Washington, Chris Castile, and there he is, joins us from the Washington Examiner's office. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, Dave. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I should say thank you for your time. I know it's the lunchtime there in Washington. The day after, what's kind of the mood in Washington, the reaction from last night's debate, which had a ton of hype coming into it?
It did have a ton of hype, and I think the mood of Washington probably is, that there weren't a lot of surprises that Hillary Clinton probably won it on points, and now we're looking to the next one, the week after next.
Do you think the debates, I think there's two more scheduled for the presidential candidates, do you think they die down, perhaps go a little more policy driven in number two and number three? Or last night we heard a lot of, I guess there was a little bit of question leading into it. Would Donald Trump be teleprompter Donald Trump or off the cuff Donald Trump? And it appeared to be off the cuff Donald Trump. Do you think they focus a little bit more in the next couple of debates?
One would hope. They did a little bit of drive-by issue discussion last night, but it really was so brief and to the point of almost being trivial. I'm more of a policy wonk myself, and I'd rather hear that stuff. But I'd actually rather hear, a serious discussion of it. I thought a lot of what both of them said on the economy and on taxes was just kind of canned political rhetoric that you could have heard from a congressional candidate. There was a very brief mention of repatriation of U.S. corporate profits that are, parked offshore. That's a serious topic that's worthy of discussion. Tax policy is worthy of discussion. And I don't know how much of it you're ever going to get in a debate like this. You get onto ISIS. And, Hillary Clinton has this laundry list of things, intensify bombing, go after the leaders of ISIL. Well, does she really not think that that's what they're doing? That is what they're doing. They've intensified bombing. They're going after their leaders. They're getting some of their leaders. So, hopefully you'll get a moderator that's able to do a better job.
Well, let's talk about that, because you tweeted last night about the same time. I think I tweeted you that I was about to tweet you about NBC's Lester Holt, who I'm a big fan of. I think he does a solid job in his regular work. But as a debate moderator last night, especially at the beginning of that, you kind of wondered where he went.
I don't really know his work. When you say his work, I don't really know his work. So I'm not really, I don't want to really comment on how he's done in context of his career. But I would say that he was absent too much of the time. And he was really terrible at following up on things, and they could be issues that he just doesn't know anything about. And again, you talk about the Fed and interest rates when Donald Trump's talking about this bubble that's going to burst if they raise interest rates. Well, what bubble is he talking about? That might actually be interesting. Is he talking about a stock bubble? A lot of people think that that equities are overpriced because of interest rates. So the repatriation of money, corporations have parked all these profits overseas because they don't want to pay taxes on them in the United States. Everybody wants a solution to that. You got none of it. But you heard these terms being thrown out, and Lester Holt was nowhere to follow up. And I think he eventually, the only thing I remember him following up on, he would eventually say, when somebody would really, get off the beaten path, hey, let's get back to the question. But the only thing I remember him trying to follow up in any kind of fact-checking type way was the stop and frisk stuff. So I thought he let them go on too much.
I agree, and you're right. That was the one time that Lester was kind of interacting with them, was the stop and frisk during the racial part of that 15 minutes, if you will. Let me ask you, Chris, from a journalist side of things, how would you moderate a debate between Trump and Clinton?
Well, I think for the very first thing is that you keep them to their time, and you insist that they stop talking, and you not let some of the exchanges go on last night, early on, really, when Trump kept interrupting Clinton. Just tell him to stop it. Tell him to stop. That is the most annoying thing to me. Like if you're watching a talking head show or something, if you're watching, whether it be, candidates or just, experts on an issue on a CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, whatever it is, and they start yelling at each other, and nobody is heard. And for a serious debate, you only get three of them. That's inexcusable. Stop it. Make them stop. And I think too, you try to hone in on issues that matter. I mean, that's just me. I mean, I understand that a lot of campaign, a lot of, whether it's congressional, governors, presidential, a lot of it is going to be trivia, and they're going to get to things that you've heard a million times before, which we did, birtherism, Trump's taxes, emails. We've heard that in countless debates now, but you know it's coming.
Were you surprised
Maybe
we didn't hear more
go ahead,
about?
sorry.
Were you surprised we didn't hear more about Benghazi or the wall?
I'm sure we'll get to it.
Just speaking of topics that we've heard a lot about over the past few months.
I can't say I'm surprised about anything. Like I said, I mean, I think presidential campaigns and debates focus on trivia, but you had an opportunity. I think when he was talking about inversions, this is where companies incorporate overseas. You had a chance to get on that, and at the same time get in on this discussion about the drug company that with the EpiPens, the
Right.
food allergy drug that's been in the news for the last month, and the woman CEO, can't remember her name, testified on Congress. That company, Mylan, is an inversion. But it also would give them a chance to talk about pharmaceutical pricing. They could then go on to what you do about the Affordable Care Act. Something has to be done. And talk about how a lot of people don't realize a lot of the high cost of health insurance is due to paying for these kinds of. You could have gotten onto things that would seem a lot more meaningful to me that have not been discussed.
You mentioned the EpiPen. You're exactly right. That's something that affects a ton of parents, and it affects their kids as well. The CEO of Mylan is Heather Bresch, I believe, is her name.
And it's a bigger, like I said, it's a bigger issue than just that drug. I mean,
Well, right.
it gets into our insurance coverage, and all kinds of things are going to have to be dealt with.
Something you mentioned earlier was, did the debate change anyone's mind? Last night, the Oklahoman hosted a watch party debate here in our video studio. It's something that was moderated by our Phil O'Connor. You can watch the entire debate on newsok.com, or the analysis reaction to the debate on newsok.com. We've also chopped it up into handy little consumable bite-sized pieces of last night's video. Where I'm going with this, Chris, is of the 9 panelists that we had, none of them said that last night's debate changed their mind.
And I don't know how it would have necessarily. If you were undecided and you made up your mind last night, I would assume it's because you're already leaning very strongly toward one of the other candidates. I don't know what anybody could have learned from that, or how they could have decided if they were genuinely undecided about whom to vote for.
And pretty much every one of them admitted coming into it, hey, I was a Hillary fan, I was a Trump fan, and they stuck with that, and they focused in on what their candidate said that they related to or that they liked.
Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but I would be interested. I'd be kind of interested in what they reacted to the most. I mean, I thought there was an interesting exchange about Trump's taxes and tax paying. I thought that was all fairly interesting.
There were 9 panelists. As it turned out, 2 people didn't show up, but we wound up with 4 Republican, 4 Democrat, and 1 Libertarian who admitted he was glad that he didn't have to vote for either one of those candidates. I think he was joking for the most part there. But at the end, 6 of them thought Hillary won. 2 were undecided as to who won last night's debate, and 1, the Trump supporter, said, hey, my guy, my candidate, Trump, won last night. There's also a poll on newsok.com that we asked users, for what it's worth, what they thought who won the poll. And as of this morning, Hillary Clinton with a narrow margin there, but again, that kind of mirrors, I think, what we're hearing from the national side of things, that Clinton may have won, as you mentioned, on points from last night's debate.
Right. I mean, and I think on that, in some ways, Hillary Clinton will always win against Donald Trump. She knows policy so much better than he does. I think she's a lot quicker on her feet. She's naturally more articulate, and I think you're more articulate when you do know something. So I mean, because she is very well versed in most of this, so she can speak more fluently about it. And I think Trump really struggles. I don't know if he struggles to understand it, but she's been immersed in it for decades, and so it's just a lot more easy for her to talk about any range of domestic or foreign policy. So in that way, I think she'll always win. And I think you could maybe imagine a way that Trump wins just by kind of more succinctly hammering home the point he's trying to make, which is, okay, you do know a lot about those things, but look at the country. And he has to do it, I think, in such a way as to not make it seem like we do live in some kind of ruined, empire. So, which is kind of what he makes it, which is absurd. He makes it sound so. He just goes on, over the edge on it.
And last night he was mentioning our airports were third world quality airports. Well,
and I'm sure there are some. I've sat in some pretty, heinous, rooms waiting rooms by a gate. But I also have gone into some very nice ones. There in Oklahoma City, here Reagan National in Washington is a beautiful airport. So that's what I'm talking about. Is that he just doesn't know how to speak in more measured tones.
It's interesting stuff. You have been busy. You had a story this past weekend on Senator James Lankford, one in today's editions of an event that President Obama spoke at yesterday on the final tribal conference. Anything else you're working on moving forward?
We're just kind of watching what's going on here in Washington this week, Dave. And this is really, I think, for Congress, they want out. This is for them. We've got to, find a way to get a temporary budget passed this week, and get the heck out of here so we can go back and campaign. So I'm watching that, just how the final compromise is going to come together, and then I think both houses may vote this week to override the president's veto on this bill that would allow Saudi Arabia to be sued.
Interesting stuff. He's Chris Castile. He covers politics, national news for us here at the Oklahoman from Washington, D.C., and he joins us every week via Skype from the Washington Examiner, our sister newspaper out there, from their studios. Chris, as always, great to catch up with you.
All right, glad to do it, Dave.
More coverage from Chris in the Oklahoman, online at newsok.com, and he does a great job on social media. You can follow him on Twitter at NewsOKPolitics.